Hello, welcome to Real Love Guitars. We have another Epiphone SG here. This one's from Mark, and it's a left-hander made in Indonesia. Nice looking thing, lovely vintage cherry, or heritage cherry I think it's called. Bit dusty, could do with a clean up, and it's down for a setup, and straight off the bat everything looks kind of nice. I think I did recognise that the intonation sounded way dodgy on these older strings, so it could be something to do with that. But anyway, so we were going to set up this left-hander. Difficult to do in the sense that I can't play them when done, so I don't get the enjoyment of testing them out. But I think it's worth checking a couple of things to begin with. Blow dust off the old amp. What I'm going to check is the intonation or the tuning, because I think one of the things that was reported that this doesn't play in tune going up the neck. So we shall see what it's looking like. Well, so observations of this are a quick look at what the relief looks like. There's about 0.2 mils of relief, a little bit less on the bass side. No, wrong one. Hard to get this harmonic to ring. There we are. Right, so let's we'll test this out. Just a quick look on the intonation first, and see what it's looking like, and we'll measure the strings as well in a minute. Okay, we're all switched up, turned up. First of all, let's check and look at the detuning when I stretch the strings. It's quite a bit. So the first sign for me is that the strings need more stretching. That's on target. Fireworks. Interesting, that A is definitely a dud string. Can often happen. They're very old anyway, but yeah, the intonation pattern looks about right, but what's showing up is audibly, that one was showing up, or that one was sounding well and truly flat when played. So just a quick check on the electrics. Obviously I can't play this, so it's not really going to be, not for the point of making any nice noises, I'm afraid. but we're looking for in that department. What I'll just do is just check the plug socket, the jack socket's loose, so we'll need to take care of that as well. Alright, so a quick check shows that the strings are old and affecting the intonation, so that's okay, we won't worry about that. We'll get rid of them and change them for new ones. It tells me that the neck relief is about right. The intonation should be set right at the end. Knobs work as expected. Jack socket is typically loose, as you often find. Strap buttons are nice and strongly attached. Tuners seem to work. And what we've got here is the nut, which looks like a plastic one. And on this guitar, what I wanted to do was give it a try of replacing the nut, first of all with an adjustable one, which I kind of cut in reverse. So it's a tryout really, to see, because I think it's worth doing from the point of view that it makes a really nice, solid, stable tuning. If not, then I have a left-handed tusk nut of the right sort of height to replace it anyway. So we'll see which. That's a kind of a special edition. It's a slightly pricier thing than the normal one, but. So in terms of action, let's measure what we've currently got. At the first fret, we've got a sort of variety of different actions here, and they're a little bit higher than what I would go for, but I will be very careful not to go for the absolute minimum. So on the bass side, yeah, it's not too bad on the. It's a spread. They've done a fairly accurate spread of heights actually, but it kind of leaps up at the low E string and gets a bit tall down there. And it's probably something like about 0.7, 0.6 or 0.7, but difficult to say. Holding two feeler gauges together. 0.6 maybe. Not massively high, but possibly not doing very well in holding tune. One of the things I just wanted to check, I think actually it's not going to be a problem. I was going to check the tuning down here, but these actions aren't so high that they would adversely affect the tuning, but it's going to be more about the friction in the nut, if anything. Now these Epiphone nuts are very neatly fitted and so on, so if we replace them, or if we're going to replace them, it should be because they're kind of presenting some sort of problem, and I'm just going to see that I always find that the slots on these are quite grippy, but this isn't overall too badly done. What I would always do with one of these, if for example I was going to keep it, I would start out by, if I've got the right, oh no, I seem to have lost the jeweler's file that I would normally use. Is it down here somewhere? Nope. Okay, I have misplaced it. I'll use a different one. Could be in here. I'll check. Yeah, so what I would typically do is to ease up these slots with a slight notching and see if we can make it play properly that way. I do like to go on the if it ain't broke don't fix it principle. So in this case we talked about replacing the nut, but I'm going to just get the action to where I want it and then just check that and see whether it's actually performing correctly or not. Before I do that, I'll just check the final fret action as well on these. Now I'm going to, some discrepancy between what I measured the other day and what someone else measured, so I just want to make sure it's not due to humidity or changes, and in fact it might be my eyes. We've got what's measuring here as, that is kind of almost spot on 2 millimeters, which is probably too high, but I'll write it down. So high E last fret is 2, and then low E last fret is a little over, that's probably 2.25, low E last fret 2.25. So I would be aiming to take that down a little bit, which I can do with a bridge, the tunematic bridge, my favourite kind of bridge, as you probably know. But let's take that in and see what occurs. Plenty of adjustment room. It can stiffen up, so you want to just make sure your screwdriver doesn't go skipping around. Now I'd want to go for a 1.5 on the low E on one of these. So it's quite a big adjustment comparatively speaking. That's a fraction below, so we come back out a little tiny bit. That's comfortably 1.5, and then on this one, let's take down, we want to go from the, it's now lowered a tiny bit anyway, but we want to go in a bit more to about 1.25, something like that. We're making very fine distinctions here. They're not totally precise. I would say that is 1.3, something like that. Let's leave it there. Obviously we want a start tuning again. So the question is, with that new lower action, is how do the notes play? And to check that out, I want to just play the notes through. Now this is an interesting area that I learned the hard way the other day. And that is, we all play the guitar with a different sort of action, and there's a lot of variables in the guitar, as you know. There's the nut height, the bridge height, the radius of the neck, the curvature or otherwise of the neck. But a lot of those you can be clear about, and you can set and choose to set them to different places, and they interact in a certain way. And if you have uneven frets, that's another variable in the mix. But one of the biggest variables is how hard somebody hits the strings. If you're hitting them really hard, they, by definition, need more room to spin, and more things will vibrate. And in fact, for a low action with a fairly flat neck, the harder you hit the strings, the more likely they are to hit the frets somewhere along their point of spin. Sometimes where can be, if it's really flat, it can be where the spin is greatest, somewhere near the middle of the string length, or if it's if the neck is not terribly flat, has some relief, you can find it can be hitting out on one of the early frets, particularly if you've got a low first fret action as well. So all those things interact. And one of the things I realise is I rarely know what a player's style is and how they hit the strings, and that is a big dark space, a big kind of a glaring information gap, because I could be playing a note saying, okay, that's playing cleanly, but somebody else comes along and goes, and can say, oh, I don't like that little sizzling buzz at the tail end of that note, in which case, you know, we have a different take. Now, if somebody plays that way most of the time, there's no point setting them an action that's so low that you can only play it quietly. So from this point onwards, I'm asking people who send me guitars to take the time to make me either a brief phone video, if they can face doing that, or if not, at least an audio file of them playing notes, playing the guitar in the sort of way they would normally play it. And and probably better not plugged. Actually, I should specify not plugged in and amplified, because what I really want to hear is how they hit the strings. So, coming back, what I need to know at this point in time is how the strings play at this new low action. Bit choky. A little bit fizzy up there. Important first observation is that so far nothing's choking out completely. So the indication there is there are no frets that are so high that they're killing off the note altogether. Okay, so at that point all the notes are playing, but that's not the end of the story, because you don't just always pluck notes. What people do is they bend them. And with a neck, if you have any fret problems, they often show up as you bend the fret up the hill towards the top of the fingerboard of the radius. Now with a 12-inch radius like this, that's a fairly minimal rise. On a tight radius like a 7.25, that's quite a significant height differential between the top of the fret and the bottom at the start of the fret. And so dragging the string up the hill, whether left-handed or right-handed, to bend the note causes the string to go vertically up higher, and then the anchor of the string still comes back to a low spot down here, so it struggles to clear the strings the frets straight after it. So if you're checking a set action, you really want to bend strings as far as you can. And this one, my fingers are too big to play some of these little tiny notes. So I think we've got a few very slightly uneven frets down here, but they're very minor, so it would be a very small amount of fret leveling needed to make them play. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to test, or I'm going to give the nut as is a slight adjustment. Now we've reduced the action, so the action down here is also going to change. And actually we're almost down to where I'd want them, but I'm just going to take them down a fraction more, but only more from the perspective of widening them, right, to release the potential grip. Now this kind of plastic is relatively easy to work. There are a lot of other kinds of plastic which are mushy, and they really pose a problem. This one, it's nice and solid, it's brittle solid, so it kind of behaves a bit like bone when you're cutting it. And so what I'm really doing there is I'm just widening, I'm using the file just to widen the slot a little bit and make sure it's running as smoothly as possible. Now if I have to go any deeper, and I think that the slot is too deep, the way of kind of widening this off is to take the jeweler file and just use it to kind of widen the V. Okay, you can see a bit of plastic coming up there. Now this helps us to get down to the required action and keep the nut in a keep the slot in a kind of almost slight V shape. Now, you know, people kind of freak out and they don't like the look of a V shape, and I understand that. If you have to have a slot with any depth, you're better off having a V than having a straight walled slot, because a straight walled slot will increase considerably, the deeper it is, the chance of your strings binding. And the reason for that is kind of just mechanical, right? I'll give you an example on the whiteboard of doom. Sorry, it's so bright over there. I don't want it to be too dazzly. If you think about it, I've done that so I can wipe that off. If you think about it, so you've got your nut there, right, and you're going to run string through it. When you're cutting with a file, you're sort of doing that. Now that's an extreme rendition, okay? But let's say that's what actually happens as you cut down, and then you end up with string sitting at the bottom like so, cross section, right, and then out the back end like so. Squeegee, right. Anyway, that's the sort of idea. Now, in principle, what you don't really want at any stage is that much of a slot. However, what's crucial in this is we take out the edge of the whatever that thing's called, the neck, and let's call that your first fret, right? What's critical is that you cut the slot to a point where there's this much distance of the string over the first fret. And there's no point saying, well, I don't want a deep slot, so I'm going to cut the slot just a bit and leave the string right up there because it'd be miles high. So the point is to get an accurate height over the first fret, you always have to cut down. If you happen to start with a tall nut, you're going to cut a long way down, and the longer you go, the deeper the slot is going to be. The problem with cutting slots is, in truth, because you're using files and it's not a machine, whether you like it or not, what really happens is this, and you get a slight kind of wiggle as you go across, because these things are thin metal and they don't cut precisely. So you get this sort of wiggle, right? And if you looked at that wiggle from above, it kind of looks like this. It's a Gibson headstock sort of thing going on, right? And that's your thing. Now, if you're using, let's say you're using a 10 gauge file. I never would for a 10 string, but let's say you're using 12 for a 10 and you think you're getting loads of room. Think about it. What happens is your string comes in there like that and it's already lost its space because of the slight curvature. There's suddenly, even for if that was a 12 thing and that was a 10 string, you suddenly, just a tiny bit of curvature lost you any difference or any space or leeway, elbow room you had between those two. And the deeper the nut is in this sense, from here to here, the greater the wiggle is going to be, and the less room your 10 is going to fit in that space. So you might even end up going to sort of 15 gauge or something, you know, if this is really wide, like a Les Paul nut or something. So that's the problem with it, and because you can't get a machine mathematically straight line, before you know it, a 10 gauge nut file will never leave you enough room for a 10 gauge string. A 12 gauge could easily have the clearance snaffled away by this slight wiggle, particularly if it's deeper because you have to use more force and so on. So with all of that in mind, what I always recommend is, if you have to cut downwards, okay, what you really want to be doing is to be first and foremost creating more of a notch. Now, of course, connoisseurs hate the sight of a notch like that, right? Because it looks like a bunch of shark's teeth, or you know, a kind of Second World War defence, anti-tank defence. But the point about it is because it's in a V notch. Immediately you're above the string, this is widening, okay? So you never have a chance for the string to get caught, because immediately above it is always wider than the string. So that's one advantage of a notch, okay? Now if you that's why I always use one of these in connection with the nut files. So I tend to cut down with a V file, especially if it's a taller nut. In this case I still do it, even though it's quite a shallow nut. And I recommend that you do that and then you round out the bottom if you're concerned that your V notch might not be the sort of correct shape for the string to sit in. Then what I recommend you do is you use a nut file to round out this bottom bit here, right, so that it has the correct shape to hold the string with the least amount of friction. Then what I recommend is when you've got all of your nut slots down to the correct heights, okay, which ends up looking more like that, right? We're exaggerating, right, but you get what I'm getting at, right? So there you have all your frets, your slots cut to the correct height. One thing you can see straight away then is that everything above around about here is totally superfluous or excess. You don't need any of this. It's serving no purpose at all. Okay, everything above that. So my standard thing to do then is to file back just about everything above that line. So you end up with a much lower nut with a very small hint of the notch remaining, okay, which holds each of the strings at exactly the correct first fret action that you were aiming for. And those don't even look like V's in the end. They just look like slots that don't look bad, and also, most importantly, because they still microscopically are widening as you go up from the string, they still don't grip as you go away. So that to me is, you know, I've thought this out from every angle. That to me is the best solution you can get if you're cutting a nut yourself, which is kind of useful in another way, because what it means, quite literally, is these files really only need to do the last bit of rounding out work, and you want to do the rest of the work with the V-notch file. Now how exactly where and when you stop is another matter. So with this one I would keep going down until I'm very close to the height I want, and then once I'm there I would switch to the nut file, and the nut file in this case, especially on a low string, would just round out and widen that V point that you might otherwise get. So now I'm switching very gently, just letting the correct nut file just round out the bottom part of my slot, and there we have it. Okay, so that would be an example of how I do it. Now typically I'd work backwards like this, starting with a G, coming back to the top E, and this is very close, but again I would still go at it with this nut file, because this V-notch file, because I just want to, whatever happens, I want to clear the space above the string. I don't want it to be rubbing on plastic. Okay, this is very close as it is. So all I'm going to do with this G file is I'm just going to run this down the slot from the point of view of making sure the shape at the bottom of the notch is the correct shape. And we should just get it just on the height, and that's a 0.3 height. So do the same again with this one. Now the thing about this is, I have to say, with a guitar like this, if you've got a plastic nut of this kind of density and it works, and you can get the nut slots right and that they are at the right height and don't grip, then my recommendation would be, particularly because it's fitted well, don't alter it. There are some people who would argue until, you know, the cows come home that bone is better, and you must have bone, or you must have tusk, or you must have graphite, or whatever. And I have to say to you, is a properly cut hard plastic. I mean, I'm pretty certain this is hard plastic. It's not. It's a bit too glossy for bone, I'm sure. But that's a good sign. It's visually quite difficult to distinguish from bone. So now this one is right on the mark. I don't want to lower it any further. So all I want to do with this is just and just widen the slot slightly so that we've cleared that gripping potential. And those are all good. Now we've done this low E, and we're going to do the other two. And I'm keeping them under tension while I do them because that one's right on the limit too. I want them strings to sit neatly in the, I want them to sit down at the bottom, all the way down in the slots. So sometimes if you don't put them under correct playing tension, you run the risk of them catching somewhere down the side, and then that misleads you completely. Now that's pretty low to begin with based on the action we've chosen, but it's still at the mark I'm happy with. Now a couple of weeks ago I had one where after setting the action, one of the original nut slots, it was also an Epiphone, was too low, or lower than I would like, and I made the others go down to it because it wasn't massively too low, but it was a mistake, particularly in combination with the player's way of playing, and I ended up with some buzz up this end which was not acceptable. A fret slap I should call it. Anyway, so I had to teach myself to not to give in to that temptation to take it down to the lowest common denominator if the lowest common denominator was underneath my target action. Now here I'm using the correct file to round it out. It's interesting that one is not cutting this material very well, but we've still got about 1/10 of a mil to do, so I'll go back to the V-notch file. Now once this is done, you'd be hard pushed, most people, to notice the V-ness of the notch, in which case it doesn't really warrant cutting down the top of the nut. But if you're a stickler for that sort of thing, you can do it, and you can cut down until the point where your strings just appear to sit in a little cup. It's all very cool looking, but you do run the risk of overcutting it, and then when you bend the strings they fire off sideways, so it's quite a tricky to get down to the stylishly low look. You do run close to the overcutting it sort of end of things, and I don't like to go there. Okay, so I'm just going to round out with this one now, smooth out the shape, and we are pretty much on the mark. Now the idea about this is that we have, along with getting the strings properly stretched, getting the nut slots freed and smooth running, plus taking out any residual slack. Those two things are basically the bulk of what causes tuning instability. So if you get those right, you'll be able to play and stay in tune. Now as I'm tuning now, having adjusted the nut slots, I'm listening very carefully for any pings or drag. I want to feel the tuning being very directly corresponding to the movement I'm making with the tuner. Now a lot of people will tune the guitar and they will operate the tuners, and they'll feel this kind of dead spots in what they think are dead spots in the tuners, where you end up kind of doing this a lot and nothing seems to change in the tuning. The bulk of that isn't actually anything to do with the tuning machines, it's to do with the friction in the nut slots, and that is surprising how much that can arrest the string moving backwards to the point where you can crank the tuning machine and nothing seems to happen. So often when that does happen, people suspect they're tuners, the tuning machines, and then kind of go off and discuss in forums, and then often people will say the solution from their point of view is to replace them, and then there'll be loads of recommendations for really cool and expensive tuners. and sometimes when I make a comment on that, this is a 10 set by the way, when I make a comment on that sometimes, people kind of can think that I'm against upgrading tuners, and as if I'm dogmatic in saying there's no point. Well, that isn't the case. There's a very good reason for upgrading tuners, and that is because a more precise set of tuners, well, first of all, they can look better, they can suit your style and preference better, but they can also, for more money, they can be a smoother operation. So the gearing is better, the precision of the components are better, and that will definitely improve the precision of your tuning and the feel of it, which is the main psychological aspect. If it feels nice and smooth, you kind of believe it's more precise and therefore stays in tune. But I do like to point out that it isn't necessary for tuning stability. In fact, about the oldest tuners you can find on earth, the crappiest Japanese, Chinese, cheapest Chinese tuners will hold tune, providing you've taken care of your slack in your strings and you've taken care of the friction in the nut slots. Now, my instinct is telling me that this nut is perfectly good to go, and although we discussed putting in an adjustable one, given that this would at best be a modified left-hand one, I'm going to take the sort of executive choice decision not to knock that off and replace it, because this is working absolutely fine. And it is on the if it ain't broke, don't fix it, especially when it involves knocking the nut off and then replacing it with something else that is not quite designed for it. And the reason I say that is because Graphtec don't make a left-handed version of this. So I was making a right-handed version. Sorry, I was making a left-handed from a right-handed, just as a sort of an experiment. But I think I would rather save Mark the 25 quid and keep the original nicely fitted nut, because I can be confident now this is going to not hold any friction, or the minimum amount of friction, and it's going to work much more smoothly than it would do before, and keep the tuning. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do on this before anything else is I'm going to just tighten up the jack socket. I think this is a design flaw on the Gibson style, Les Paul style guitar, where they put the jack on the surface here, and the reason for that is sort of logical, because that forces the jack plug to stick out like that, and of course it's subject to an awful lot of waggling, which is quite a long extreme force by the time you've amplified it in the sort of lever principle, and it's almost always going to at best come undone, which is the enemy of your electrical wiring, because as soon as that starts moving you're going to get a broken connection sooner or later. So it's not only the enemy of your wiring, but it's also it also causes the wood here to crack, quite common, because it's very thin anyway. It has to be to accommodate all the components. This one's lost its little tone thing, a little silver hat. I might have a spare one somewhere built into an existing one. So anyway, to make sure that this stays done up, and this will be, oddly, a right-handed jack socket. So we lock this little StewMac tool in place, and then we can we lock it in place going counterclockwise. Come on, would you please take hold? Thank you. Lock it counterclockwise, and then whilst holding it, we can tighten up the thing. Now this is, I don't know if this is actually stripped or broken, but something isn't right about this, so I'm just going to put this on hold for a minute. It's not releasing it, which is also interesting. I've never done that before, so I'm not at all sure what's going on with this jack socket. I think it might be a cause for replacing it, because this is definitely holding on to it in a way that is not going to let me release it. Okay, well, we'll do it the hard way, but that means we will take off the back cover, and I think we'll replace it because there's something at fault there for starters, which we can do without. And that is one of the reasons why I think that's a poor design. So I've obviously got that sticking out for the time being, and until I can remove this, I'm sort of stuck holding the guitar in this position because I can't put it down because of that tool sticking out. So slightly adverse working situation. But yeah, so you'd much rather it was on the end of the body, far less stress. Or, you know, as the Stratocaster did, put it aslant, or as Ibanez did on some of their models, put it in a slant and make sure that it's putting the least amount of pressure possible onto the surface of the wood and also on the jack plug itself, because movement is the enemy of your basic guitar wiring. Okay, so I've got all the switches in here because this has got push, pull, push, coil splits. What's it got written on here? Ooh, it's an Epiphone. Actually, it's an Epiphone one, but it's darned if it's going to let go of my tool. That's very odd. As I say, I've never had this happen before. Wow, that is weird. I was tightening that way, I need to come this way, but it does not want to let me do it. This is odd, I tell you now. Right. I'm going to have to replace that if it's going to hold on to this forever. You can see there, it's turning around. The whole of the barrel is kind of locked on this tool, and it's turning the barrel around, which is no good. I've been using this device for quite some time, and it's absolutely never done this before. So I'm going to have to grip that with my adjustable spanner, all of which is absolutely unwanted intervention. We don't want to be doing this. Right, just lock it on, please. Come on. Thank you, Lordy. So this, what had me worried about this is rotating here, and I don't like the feel of that, and that I wasn't able to tighten this up. So let's just double check on this to make sure it's okay. Okay, thank you for the components. So it's a really weak component, this sticking through. It's an Epiphone one. I'm just for my own peace of mind, I'm going to change that. I've got some Nutric ones, which are very nice quality ones, but what I don't want is for this thing to spin round. Now they probably look a little bit fraction bigger, but there is room for that to work in there. So I'm going to switch on the soldering iron, which is going to make a noise. I'm going to have one of these lined up because I just don't want that thing to spin. I need it to be able to adjust tightly without spinning round, and that is not what was happening there. It's a bigger nut as well, so it will hold it better. So I've got a bit of cloth, protective cloth. So it's just a little detour really, I guess you could call it. Give me a bit of solder, possibly the little arm to hold things. Yeah, anyway, so apart from that little detour, the main aspects of the setup are checked, and the nut slots adjusted. Now what I would now next do, once we've got tidied up this jack issue, I'm going to we will mark up the frets and do a very light fret leveling, because we've taken it down and it is lower, but there is a tiny bit of zizzing, meaning the frets will benefit from a little bit of leveling, but not much. It doesn't need much. So first of all, I'm going to remove this hot signal lead. If I can just melt the solder. Thank you. Remove the hot signal lead, followed by the ground lead. Come on. Thank you. Yep, Epiphone, alright, but hey. So here we have the Nutric replacement, and we'll just use the same wires. They're in good shape, the ends. We're going to go, it's funny how the wire always seems to sit opposite to the way you want it. It's a weird thing when it comes to jack socket wires. And then we've got, I had a dream that somebody had the most amazing, sad, the most amazing helping hands gripping thing, and I saw it and I just so badly wanted it. It was a multiple thing, and I think I've been promising, well, I know I've been promising myself for quite some time to get one of those octopus arm jobs, because this little metal thing does my head in. Okay, that's the hot department connected up, and then we'll come through the back here for the ground side of things. Doesn't quite go through the hole, but just get it to sit in there, we'll be alright. But of course it won't. A very small little stump, I have to say, and it does not at this point want to go through the hole. Not even enough to help get the thing done. So I'm going to try and just cut a slight point onto it, which is also refusing to cooperate. Maybe even that will do. There we go, that's just enough. And that's beautifully out of the way, not. Try and get this white wire a little bit clear. Give it as much room as possible. Can I get up under here? Yes. Okay. Ta-da! My stomach is always rumbling in the shed. Now the only thing that might happen here is this might not fit through the hole, in which case we'll just slightly widen it. Looks like it's been a bit roughly cut in the first place. Yeah, it's a fraction smaller than the Nutric one. So we'll just very slightly adjust it. There we go. Half a mil's difference or something. Now I'm noticing on this one it doesn't fit through, it doesn't sit very cleanly, so I don't know if the surface of the wood's a bit raggedy or something, but let's just check. That should stick out further than that. I think something's blocking it. Now, if we can just no, that's the wrong. These are the wrong pieces. If I can get the new nut on with the washer, we should be good to go. Well, that is interesting. How this doesn't fit through. Why is that? Well, it's been cut away a little bit deliberately by somebody in the past. So kind of implication, well, that's a bit longer than that one maybe. But it looks like somebody struggled to get that to come through far enough in the first place, which is another interesting thing. I wonder if we might have to use a less decent quality jack socket in order to get it to fit in. Not a great thing really. I mean, we can just about get the socket or the nut on without the, what do you call it, that thing, washer. But really, I want to get it on with. So that actually doesn't give us a hell of a lot of room at all. Bizarre. I don't want to be digging out any further wood out of there, because that's what weakens the whole thing in the first place. I wonder if that a little push there maybe gave us a bit more room to get the washer on and grab the nut. Anyway, we shall see. No, it doesn't bite. What I don't want to do is use the original one, because that is a weakness. So we've got a fairly decent quality alternative. Are they all Nutrix? They're Nutrix. How annoying can it be? It is annoying. So, this one could be a good one. Stay there. This has got a nut on here which we can take off to increase the overall length. Yeah, this one, so that one hasn't got this little step. That's annoying. This is nice quality, but the only way we're going to do it is by digging that a little bit further into there. And I like the quality of the jack, but I'm not keen on digging it further through. I'll try it one more time, see if I can get some purchase. No, man, this is really uncooperative. Especially when your fingers are cold and useless. No. It's a pain, a right pain. Let's try one more thing then. And we'll replace it for a less quality one. Where did it go? It was that one. Let's just have a look. Make sure that sits through. Oh, this is really annoying. Why have they done this? Is it unusually thick or something? Because no replacements fit. Okay, I don't want to have to revert to the original, but it's starting to head in that direction. Thank you. I didn't like the way it was turning when I was fitting the, it's still doing Do any of these turn in the same way? Well, I guess they do. Yeah, that wasn't what I was hoping to see, but maybe that's not the big problem. Maybe I just blew that. But anyway, bottom line is I don't want to dig any wood out of this guitar, so I'm going to remove this one and go back to the original and test it and double test it. But I want to make sure it sticks, or I can get it screwed securely into the body. Replacement, no good. Original, try again. I hadn't noticed anything spinning before like that, but I didn't like the look of it. But if it's not going to make any major difference, then we'll have to go back to the original. I don't like these crappy tools. Okay, let's try this again. Okay, first of all, what's that sticking down there? Fluff of some kind. Right, we have the live side. Okay. Come on. And background to this one, which we could do with it pointing the other way. Okay, we'll go back to this one. It's funny that the Epiphone has this characteristic because the nut is also taller on Epiphones, or most Epiphones, than it is on many other similar Les Paul style neck ends. And what I'd really like is for this thing to stay in place more, but we just have to rely on the tightness of the nut, which is what I don't like about it in the first place. Let me just feel this. I don't like this nut for starters. It feels dodgy. Let's try a different one. So straight away, this Epiphone jack plug doesn't seem to. The thread doesn't really feel great, and it's struggling. There's more trouble than it should be. That's the first observation. I don't know if something's damaged the thread previously. Goes on now, but it seems not to want to do it from this angle. How can something so simple be so problematic? And the same again, it doesn't want to go on here in a clean fashion. It's trying to go on sideways, if anything. It's nuts. Holy cow. I really can't quite believe what fight this thing is putting up. This is quite astonishing. First of all, it doesn't sit in smoothly because somebody's gouged the wood inside, so it's wobbling all the time. And the second thing is this nut that went on smoothly a minute ago when I took it out of position and held the two parts, now doesn't want to go on smoothly. That's incredible. Oh, Lord have mercy. that's not even going on the correct way. I'm astonished at this. It's the end of this thread is in some way damaged, and it's when there's only a certain amount sticking out, it's causing the nuts to go on at an angle, and I can't get them to go on at the correct angle. It's just amazing. See, it goes on wonky like that, and I can't strip it back or recut it or anything. But there, it wants to go on. Push it through here, now into this clumsy position. Now I try it, and it goes on every which way but the way I need it to go on. Oh my god, this is incredible. Every time I do it from this position, it goes on sideways. That's just phenomenal. So in this first correct position, it just doesn't want to bite. Finally. That's amazing. When we talk about ancient technology, really. Now, this is without using that little machine. That's holding it as well in place as it's going to go. It really is 1950 technology. Now the important thing is just to make sure it does work the way it's meant to, so let's just test this before we make any assumptions at all. Okay, that's fine then. Right, let's just put this back on here, keep those tucked out of the way. And we have got the humbucking coil split switches here, and they've got they're on little plates with what do they call those things? No, it's not printed circuit. It's got little tiny printed circuit boards in there, which are part of the pot itself. Okay, now I can't. There it is. Thank you. Weird. Some days things just go really odd. I should probably just save my sanity and use the electric screwdriver for this part of it. Yeah, so they got little circuit boards on the push-pull pots, which is quite cool. Don't know why that makes it any easier than using the little tiny lugs on the commercially available ones, but maybe it's not easier. Maybe there's another reason why they do it. Maybe it's more secure in the long term, something like that. Okay. Anyway, so there's a small and frustrating detour, kind of necessary from the point of view of getting that tool back out, but frustrating because a quality replacement jack socket won't fit in there because it can't reach far enough through, which is weird. Anyway, I shall just kind of put these things away for another day, even though they've been trialled. They're still useful. And then we'll get on and just mark up the strings. No, the frets. I'll do that and then I'll take a break. Now, get those things out the way. Get this off. These out the way. No longer necessary. Same with this. And then I will take a break. think. Can I even tell what time it is? Yes, I better take a break. Right, I will mark this up briefly. I think I might use this pen, partly because I'm not keen on the way that the, I don't know what it's called, Sharpie has been, that particular big Sharpie has been put a sort of slightly sticky black marks. Another reason why this is good to do a fret level here, partly to free up some of those just slightly starting to ziz notes. We've got some wear down at the first few frets here, and that will probably be taken care of through this process. I've probably said on loads of different videos that removing notching or grooving down at this end caused by playing chords for many years, it's not necessarily a reason in and of itself for fret leveling. It has to get quite extreme before that notching actually gets in the way of playability. So it tends to be something that I do as a byproduct of the other reason for leveling, which is obviously to free up the notes and the bends that we want from a guitar like this. So on a low action, I have to state. So we're marking the frets off. I missed that one altogether. Marking the frets off with pen, permanent marker, so that when I come to level I can use the marker pen as a guide to what I have levelled and what I haven't. Like I say, it's going to be a very small amount of levelling, and if we get an improvement on the notches at this end down here, then that's a bonus. But I'm going to take a break for a second and go and get something to eat so I don't do my stark rumbling. Just make sure these are in tune before I go, ready for the fret levelling. Pretty good, all in tune. Okay, I shall see you in a minute. Welcome back. Food done, next stage to do. So we're going to do the fret leveling using the banana method, or otherwise known as the adjustable truss rod method. And basically all you have to think of it as is an adjustable leveling beam. So it's a truss rod, a rod and bar type, with some self-adhesive sandpaper, 400 grit, stuck to the underside, and by the medium of these three little brass screws, all of the same size, no nuts, dome nuts, I'm tuning the tool to have the same curve as the neck has. And once I've got the tool tuned to that curve and broke my fingernails, I'm then going to place the leveling beam upon the fretboard, and under the weight of gravity I'm going to use it to run up and down here, sanding the frets with the 400 grit. Now I do it a little bit to the edge, back in and all over, and stop, and then I'll have a look at what it's telling me, and it's cutting the frets pretty much everywhere I want. It's touching them everywhere, so I know that I've got the correct amount of curvature. It's following the neck accurately. It's cutting a little bit more at the top here, but it's also taking away some of the grooves down at the bottom end, but it's on the low E, so you wouldn't expect to see too many grooves just yet. So the nice thing about this method is if you then put the string back into its slot and remove the spacers, you can then test it, and providing it's playing the way you want, that's great. You can then replace the brass nuts and calibrate again, or double check the calibration. I'm doing it in the same place on the neck that I did last time because, quite frankly, I haven't got a space to the outside of the low E in this case to do it, so I always go north furthest away first. But it means that on any neck, whether it's left or right-handed, the first two strings in that over at that side get the same basic calibration of the curve, or basic same curve. Now I'll just pull the string, the A string now out of the way, and then in with the file and work it up and down, and mostly gravity, a little bit of occasional little bit of downward force, but it's mostly just keeping it moving under its own weight. And looking at it again, it's cutting pretty much everywhere except there, but it's cutting these two. Now the problem is, if it doesn't cut there, it means these will just so happen to be 2 or 3 slightly lower frets. And if it doesn't get down to there, then we may not necessarily clean the, we may struggle to clean the wear grooves out of those 2 frets. But it's not the most important thing, and we don't want to be costing a ton of fret metal. In chasing, you know, we don't lose a load of fret metal just chasing a cosmetic improvement on the cowboy chord grooves, if you like. So moving on to the D string now, again just checking the calibration again, altering it if we need to, because believe it or not, across the radius the curvature sometimes changes a little bit, not a huge amount but a tiny fragment. And then back in with our adjustable truss rod, or the banana, since it's bendy and it's adjustable. I don't know, bananas aren't adjustable, are they really? But so we do have a couple of low frets showing up. I just have to check my phone because I'm buying some guitars for a customer. Okay, yeah, okay. Do I know where it is? KFC, bottom of town. No. That should be enough info. With a thanks. Okay, yes, I'm buying 3 guitars for my customer who is in a buying spree at the moment. So I'll be getting those in Plymouth. Might want to do a tiny bit more on that one, but we're very close. So once we've leveled these frets, then the next stage is to re-profile them. So in doing so, remove any of the flatness that the leveling process has imposed on the top of the frets, and then once that's done, it's be time to polish them out. And I use a series of varying series of papers of different grades. Oops, that needs to be more curved. And we go from 600. So this is currently 400 grit. The marks I'm leaving with this. We'll move on to a sanding, 600 grit sanding, and then 1000, then 1500, and then after that a set of micromesh pads or papers, sheets, that runs from 1500 through to 12,000 in big chunks, obviously. Now, this is where the fret leveling is kind of most critical in a way, because this is the area, this G track is the area where you get any chokes when you're bending the E strings up in the case of a right-handed, or for me down in the left-handed guitar. Of course each note still has to play cleanly, which it does, and then we start to, we want the E strings to bend all the way. Now I'm getting to it last in the case of a left-handed guitar. In a right-handed guitar I would have cleared I would have started on the thin E, and I would have been clearing the G track sort of halfway into it. Now I'm kind of doing it this way around. I'm waiting to the end, but I'm pretty confident that by the time I get to the end, I'll not only have all the individual notes playing, but I'll have any possible buzzing or hissing, zinging noises on the big bends at the top taken care of as well. And at the same time, I'm also seeing how it's looking for tidying up the dents down at the bottom, the cosmetic fret wear. Feels quite fine. It's all cutting as I'd hope and expect it to. Good. Yeah, that thing about you know, the decision to keep the original nut, it's just it's one of those, if it ain't broke and it works, don't fix it sort of things. You know, the factory nut on a Epiphone is usually fairly well fitted, and it's slightly taller than most others for Les Pauls and so on, and so it's a kind of, if you just remove it for the sake of it, you're just going backwards a bit really. So the most important bit is that the nut slots are right, and as I said at the beginning, that hard plastic actually cuts pretty well of all the plastic possibilities. There are some cheaper, spongier plastics which are just a nightmare to try and use, and I will replace those because they're horrible. But if you could get them cut properly and they were the right height for the first fret action, then that plastic in itself doesn't really rob you of any tone. You know, people will always argue that it does have some relation to tone, but nice. I'm happy. That's all working exactly as I would like it. So you know, that's hitting it fairly hard. So we've got free ringing strings. I'm not being too gentle with them. You know, we can hit the open strings reasonably hard. And that's all good. So from this point onwards, it's time to take the strings off and throw them away. I've got plenty of sacrificial strings of this gauge, so there's no real reason to spend time sorting them out to keep them. And what I will do at this point when the strings are off is I will clean up the guitar and give it a good sort of polish down. I've got some Dunlop polishy stuff actually, which I've oddly never used, but I might try it out here. Dunlop 65, they call it. So yeah, give it a clean, and then we'll be into. Sorry. First of all, I'll do the reprofiling. Then I'll give it a clean. Then I will mask off the neck so that we can polish out the frets. And then once that's all done, it's pretty much a case of getting ready to restring it. So, I'm going to cut this. You've lost your teeth, my friend. Okay. I'm going to leave that there for now. Oh yeah, I was going to look for another one of those tops, wasn't I? Let's see if I had one knocking about in my... This is rather overfilled. Ah, I need that one. Must have that one. I'm going to do something with that soon. Let's put it down on there. I want it. That's what I'm saying. Okay, so let's have a look in here. That is nearly the right one. Well, it's got the top bit, but it's not exactly the same. Not exactly the same thing. I wonder if I could take the top bit off. Well, we shall see. Let's see if there's another one first. Look, another tone. Is that? Oh, that's from an Epiphone. By the no, it's slightly different again. Volumes on 2, volumes on 2, tones on 2, tones on 2. Well, it's the right position, just a slightly different what's it. I'm going to give you that one for free, and you can take it off and replace it with the other one back again if you want. It has slightly different numbers, but it's got the shiny bit on top, which is more visible than the numbers are from far away. There you go. And as you can see, I've got a ton of spare bits like that, so it's no big deal. And it is as simple or complex as using the knob puller to remove the original, like this, like that. Yeah, there you go. Put that one in with it. And you've got the 4 shinies back. Right, that's that. We're going to get the pen out again. And we're going to mark the frets again prior to recrowning them. These are medium size frets. I'm going to use that side of the file. And that's going to round off any flat spots. It shouldn't take long because we've hardly removed any really. Just been very light leveling, and once that is done, and then I'll do some cleaning. We'll also along the way clean the fingerboard up as well. Give it a shower? No, a scrub down, whatever that is. Spring clean in November. Okay, so we're going to use the medium end of this, and we're just going to use it to round off any flat spots. I have a feeling that this tool is starting to get tired. Maybe it's my eyes. It's still working, but sometimes it gets clogged up with the pen and stops wanting to cut as well, and I have to stop and clean it. I can't really blame it, considering how much effort it gets, or how much work it does. Yeah, this is straightforward, and I think we've got rid of all of the grooves down at that end too, which is nice. A bonus, I would say. Okay, so once I've got this one done tonight, tomorrow I'm going to focus on finishing Adam's green Jazzmaster kit, which is hanging up behind me. And then once that's done, I'm going to get this next kit going, which is sort of a Strat Telly mix, I think. And that's another one that I spray painted in the summer. Again with the same type of, or same brand of Halford's car paint, but I really was surprised how good it was to use as a guitar paint. It's a bit of a mysterious subject, guitar paint, and it seems to me, I could be wrong, but when I started doing this sort of stuff I was desperate to try and find out, the sort of just the bottom line, the simple stuff about how guitar finishes might work or what the possibilities were. And as soon as I started looking, the first thing that struck me was how complex it was and how obscure, and it seemed to me that nobody who knew was able to or willing to lay out clearly a sort of starter's beginner's guide. It seemed to resist all interpretation, and so I spent quite a lot of time looking around trying to find information. And of course one of the things that a lot of people would say was that you cannot possibly use mix nitro with poly and so on and so on, and these are all things that seem to have multiple definitions themselves anyway. So when you find out there's this thing called nitro, and then you find out what different people mean when they say nitro, and then you find out there's cellulose paint, which tends to be used with nitro cellulose clear finish, and that tends to be called lacquer, but poly isn't lacquer. Poly is a different kind of finish, but there are lots of different kinds of poly, and so on and so on and so on. And then you have people who insist that the two can never mix, and then you have people who say they can, and so on and so on. And it's pretty daunting actually when you're first involved in it. Right, I'm going to just hold there for the time being, because it's got rid of most of the excess dust that would get in the way. And so what I'm going to do now is get the fingerboard masked off. I'm going to do a fret polishing off camera because it's boring, and then I get a chance to zone out and listen to the radio. And once I've done the fret polishing, then I'll do a bit more cleaning and dusting, housekeeping, and then we'll come back to restring it with a nice new set of Ernie balls 10s after having oiled the fingerboard. Oh, and while I'm doing the cleaning, I'll use the Dunlop 65 stuff, if I remember where I put it. In fact, I inherited that from, I think that was from Paul actually a while back, so I haven't really used it, so thank you, Paul, if you ever see this video. So yeah, I shall do this one, and then we'll go off camera, and I'll come back when it all is miraculously polished out and I've got a bit of radio entertainment in my ears. See you in a bit. Okay, so oiled or sanded, fret sanded, everything cleaned, fingerboard oiled, excess oil wiped off. And so now it is time to add new strings to the mix, and importantly stretch those new strings out once they're fitted. Now in this case I have to string them backwards. It's not really backwards, but it does feel that way to me. Yeah, so this is a critical part, I suppose, when you come to restring your own guitar, and to get it right you have to just pay careful attention to the stretching part. As I said before, it's about half of what ensures your tuning stability, ensuring that your guitar will play and stay in tune, which is the important bit. Everyone can get the guitar to play in tune to begin with when you first tune it up, but it's whether it stays in tune once you've done a couple of finger bends, and if you've got a tremolo, crank the tremolo, and if it doesn't, that's where you know you've either got unstretched slack in your strings, or your nut slots are causing friction and gripping hold of the strings. And so this part, now we've got the slots correct, this part is the last part in the formula, getting the strings stretched out, on and stretched out. So first of all, I'm just going to line up all the holes on these tuning machines, tuning posts, up vertically, and up in line with the guitar neck, and also make sure the pegs are vertical, because otherwise they get in the way of trying to wind them on. So it's kind of useful to start that way, and then we thread through, make sure it's properly through, and then I tend to pull back a fret's worth, and then on this side I'll hold it down and I'll do it this way around. Now a left-handed player will probably do it from the other side, and so it won't look quite like this, but for me this starts off with doing the bass strings on the wrong side. But that pulled back fret's worth of string gives it enough room to wrap around 2 complete coils and between the coils they sort of sandwich the cut end of the string, which is quite useful, and that puts it in a sort of a little miniature lock. So the first time round I do direct the held tight string over the loose string above it, and then as the loose string comes round I pull it up, so this time I can direct the held string underneath it to get that sort of pinched lock off thing going on. Oops. And then that locks it off nicely. So from this point onwards, as soon as you start operating the tuning machines, or peg heads as the American friends would say, as soon as you start operating the tuning machines, you really are listening and feeling for any resistance. So you want to hear the note change in a very linear fashion to your use of the machine, and then you also want to not to hear any pings of any kind which would indicate the string is releasing after having been stuck in the slot. So again, this side, hold it, direct it over the loose excess string, and then second time round push it under the loose string. And then we're into stretching, and once we've got the tuning pretty much stable, then we'll take care of the intonation, or double check the intonation. Now with the old strings, it was probably a bit dodgy. It's incredible how big a difference old strings can make to the intonation, because the intonation is a sort of the position of the saddle. It depends on the composition and thickness of the string, and I guess the reason they go so far off when they get older, or they can go so far off, is because probably through grime and whatnot, grease and dust, that composition is essentially changed, so it doesn't behave. It needs a different scale length to what it does when it's clean, which is obviously not something you can be continually adjusting. Much better to change your strings on a regular basis. Okay. So that's my strings on. Carefully cut the excess off in such a way that you don't leave any bits left to hurt someone. I'm continually getting spiked by somebody's old, badly cut, overhanging string daggers. And if you've seen any of my videos where that happens, you know I'm not a happy character when that happens. So the first thing I do is I just get hold of the strings. I'm going to pull them fairly, not too hard, but just to make sure they're seated everywhere they should be seated. And believe it or not, this does pull out quite a lot of the slack in the first go. And of course, being careful with the thinner strings, because they are liable to break. It's always good to have some spares knocking about. Now as you're winding to do this first tuning, listening for those pings and feeling how the note changes in a direct linear fashion in relation to the way you operate the knob. And then what we'll do is we'll do it this way from now. We'll get the strings and we'll push and stretch every bit of them, but mostly between thumb and forefinger as you go backwards and forwards, to avoid putting direct strain over the saddle, and we don't want to directly strain the string over the saddle or the nut, but we do want to get a bit of a stretch on every bit of it that we can get our hands on. And the important thing this time is to feel and hear the difference how much slack has been pulled out, because the act of doing this will detune the strings now, and that will be slack that otherwise would have stayed in the string until it chose to come out when it felt like it, and usually not when you felt like it. So again, careful on the high E. So that's quite a big detuning. So I might do another little bit of stretch here, and then possibly one more thumbs and fingers stretch after this, and then who knows, a bit of bending just to try and eke out any more bits of slack. And everybody says they do some stretching, but nobody really does enough. If I can pull any detuning out of this, then it isn't fully stretched. And once it is fully stretched, in combination with free running nut slots, you will enjoy a tuning stability so great that you will reach for this guitar over any others that you may possess where you haven't done this to either the slack or to the nut slots. You'll keep reaching for this one for the good old-fashioned reason that actually, when we reach for a guitar, about the only thing that really matters is that it stays in tune. All the other stuff is secondary. In tune. Nearly. Almost. Near enough. I can't bend tens. Okay, so I think we're pretty much at the point where it's stable. Like I say, you'd be able to go up and play this on stage now without any further worry about tuning, hardly any, maybe tiniest little bit now. Good, that's that done. Very happy with that. Now the next bit is to check the intonation on this and make sure that's where we want it to be. And we do this using the digital tuner, or the whatever this is called, you know, battery tuner, and we tune the harmonic at the 12th fret to E, and then we fret the 12th fret. Now this is a bone of contention there often, right? It's E, that's pretty much spot on, but if I really press hard, that's E. Oh no, that's terribly sharp. Of course you can make it sharp. The biggest variable in testing and setting your intonation is your grip, okay? And you know, so when somebody goes on about you must have thousands of dollars worth of I don't know, whatever you call it, expensive tuning equipment, oscilloscopes and stuff, given that you never fret, no two people fret the same note the same way, and no one person frets the same note twice the same way, so it's that kind of precision is just ridiculous. What you're looking for is a kind of a mean or an average based on your way of fretting a note. Now I can't know that my way of doing it is the same as Mark's. So I can only hope for a fair average. Now this A string is doing what it did before, and that is, I can see why actually, there you go, it's too long and it's coming low. But if we look at it, the noise, if we actually take a look at it, which I didn't look closely before, that is out of sequence, right? That one's almost level, the A is almost level with the E, the A should be between those two. So having blamed it on the dirty string to begin with, it actually turns out it's very evidently to do with the position of the saddle, which I'd not spotted in the first place. So I'm now going to turn this counterclockwise, no, is it the other way? Oh, clockwise, to drag it back. And I'm going to drag it back to, so that the fulcrum, or whatever, the middle point is halfway along. Now that will change the tuning slightly. So retune, and we're on the mark. Now what are we doing? We're doing the D. On. Pretty much on, apart from that one. So if we now look with the low action at the first fret, we now check the notes. Open E, slightly sharp of F, F. If you hit it hard, it's sharp of F. If you don't hit it hard, it's F. F sharp, G, G sharp, A. It's interesting that falls slightly flat as we go up. Nothing you can do about that, the overall scale length is right. I think the E is a tad long, but apart from that we're nearly all there. I can remember which way to turn it. Let's turn it that way, turn it this way. Okay. Pretty good. I'm happy with that. And there we have it. Mark's SG 400. Basically, nut cut to make sure the slots are free running, slightly widened slots set to 0.3mm all the way across. Relief checked, not needed to be adjusted, it's correct range, it's about 0.2mm. We have the, let's just have a look at that. We could do with a tiny increase in the height of the neck pickup, technically speaking, but it may be there because Mark prefers it that way, so it can always be taken back down again if he doesn't. Well, a little bit more. what else? Frets leveled and polished out, everything else cleaned, knob replaced, jack socket strengthened. Tried to replace it with a higher quality one, but because of the construction of the body, it won't allow that to go through far enough. And somebody's already dug away under there in the wood, and I don't want to dig any further just to make a better quality socket fit. Now, having taken the bridge off and put it back on, the action may have moved by a tiny amount, which it has, so I'm just going to make a tweak. Sometimes that's what happens and I kind of forget that point, and maybe just leave it in the action, because when you take the bridge off, sometimes these spinny things spin and you get a slightly different height when you put it back on, which is what's happened here. But we leveled it for the 1.2 millimeters and 1.5, and that's what we're going to set it at, which is a little bit higher over there. It's typical when I was in there cleaning it, that's typically what happens, is it gets brushed with the cloth and it spins the little wheels around. Okay, so if we just go back to tuning, double check. All good, delicious. Thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed it. See you again soon.